On the villa site, Matt's been having trouble finding a definite date for the villa's construction. Demolition rubble's been dated to the 2nd century, so it's definitely a very early villa. But it could have been built as much as 50 years after the Romans arrived. So were there people living here at the time of conquest? We're adding to the pottery finds that paint an unexpected picture.
So what sort of date range of Roman material have we got here, Mark?
Well, we've just got a small selection here, and we're really starting with the later part of the 1st century AD.
Right.
And the 2nd century AD. But we've also got some late Roman, some 4th century AD, but it's predominantly late 1st and 2nd century. But we've got a bit of a gap with the earliest Roman pottery. We have not yet been able to recognise any pottery that dates from the period of the Roman conquest through to about AD 75 or thereabouts.
So that's about 30 years missing at the beginning of the Roman period.
Right. That's right. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Does that indicate that there are gaps in the sort of buildings and occupation on the site then?
Well, it's looking increasingly to me from the pottery that we ought to have another building somewhere.
Right. Well, that's a bit of a conundrum, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean, you're presumably not thinking of a villa-type structure at all, are you?
No, I wouldn't expect a villa at that date. You're probably thinking about a timber building, a farmstead. It could conceivably still be a roundhouse at this phase and just making the transition to a more rectilinear Romanised timber building.
Right. Well, we'd better have a look at the geophysics and everything else, hadn't we? And see where that might be.
Yeah.
If we find a missing building, it may reveal Romanisation, no longer wooden and round, but rectangular or stone-built. Then in Helen's Trench, we find hints of just such a structure. Helen put a trench in here because she thought there might be a big ditch here, and sure enough, you can see that against the clay there, but it's this side of the trench that you started getting really excited about.
Yeah, look, we seem to have found a wall. It's got these great big stones in it, and the finds that are coming off are interesting. We've got a piece of Samian ware and a lovely rim of black burnished ware. Good Roman stuff, but then we've also got a piece of clay pigeon, so we're really not sure what the date might be yet.
I mean, the thing is, we didn't know it was here because we'd only done a magnetic survey. We got the ditched enclosure, but we didn't see this wall. I mean, if this is a building, then it puts a whole different perspective on it.
Where is the ditched enclosure?
Well, you say ditched enclosure, but hang on. Now, I'm standing on the corner. It's 30 metres long that way, it's 10 metres long that way. Could it actually be a huge, great big timber building, this enclosure? And if that's possible, could that stone wall be the replacement in stone? So we could maybe have a sequence.
How do we find out?
Well, we're just about ready to extend the trench and we're going to go exactly that way where you are, so I think you better move.
But the West Country weather is proving a challenge. In past excavations, the local society have uncovered what seems to be a major gatehouse designed for the villa. The two supporting towers had massive footings, and they're bothering Stuart.
I mean, what's really unusual about that gatehouse is the scale. I mean, that's a substantial building of that scale at 6 metres by 3 metres for each tower. Something of that order you'd expect either on a fort or a big villa. It seems totally out of context in relationship to that very small building, doesn't it?
It seems half the size of the actual villa, which it must dwarf it, really, in respect.
That would make it really unique and unusual. It puzzles me why you'd have something so big with that. I think it just needs a little bit more work to see if we can get to the bottom of what this structure really is.
I've certainly got to the bottom of the side of the altar, and I'm pretty much getting towards the base of the front of it. It's a surface, but it's characterised by masses and masses of quartz pebbles.
So do you think they're a surface as opposed to offerings inside the altar or beside the altar?
That might be some sort of a floor.
So that's much more architectural, which is, I think, what's actually happening in here as well. They seem to be using, again, these angular bits of quartz, and they're putting them around the inside of the kist, and they've formed like a little box. And inside it was a lot of the soil. You can see here it's charcoal flecked brown, but it comes also down onto this very yellow clay, and that's where I'm stopping. It's almost like, instead of using like a wooden box and putting it in there, they've used these to construct the box to contain something like relics.
Now, one thing that's been nagging me since day one is that. Do you think that stone's got anything to do with your box?
What I can say is that the dimensions fit.
Well, it would actually slide in here.
Literally just slide right here. And if this Keeill became less important over time, those relics may have been taken somewhere else. That would explain why this has been disturbed and then sort of put into the wall area that we can see now in this collapse.
Well, logically, I suppose if they were going to empty that out, they got to take that out first.
It would be the first thing to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What venerated objects were in this quartz-lined box, we can now only guess at. But they lay at the east end of a chapel where priests once worshipped on a quartz floor and prayed at a carefully constructed stone altar. And all this inside the stone and turf-walled Keeill the Vikings built on a 500-year-old Christian cemetery, which itself occupied a burial ground that had already dominated the Manx landscape for over a millennium. After 3 days' hard work, we've now got only one mystery outstanding, and it just happens to concern one of the most important discoveries we've ever made.
That one's a really interesting one, actually.
In the lab, we're adding to our picture of the landscape as it looked when it was first farmed.
They're dung beetles.
Where'd you get them?
We got them from the section where we were doing the processing in the stream.
And what do they tell us?
They actually tell us about the environment. They're telling us that there were animals grazing in the area when the deposit was formed.
How can you work that out?
Because there was lots of dung, and that's what they were interested in.
OK, this tells us there was animal dung here, but can you work out which animals the dung came from?
You can sometimes, yes. They tend to be associated with the large herbivores such as cows, sheep, goat, and pigs and horses and things like that. So, yeah, they can be quite useful.
Is it true you sometimes dream about beetles?
It is, Tony, yes.
What kind of dreams?
I had a nightmare about one last night.
This is a big one.
It was a very big one.
It's just after lunch on our final day, and at last something's come up in Trench 3 that could focus this whole dig. It's a small sherd of pottery. And this could be the first piece of evidence that puts our house circle firmly into the Bronze Age.
Carl, I'm so excited about this because this is the first piece of pottery we've had in this trench.
Well, I think you're very right to be excited. This is Bronze Age pottery. It's what we call Trevisca ware here in Cornwall. It dates from the Middle Bronze Age. So yes, this is a very exciting piece. And I've just noticed on the interior, if you look carefully, you can see the black area.
Yeah.
That's actually internal residue, and that's the last meal that was cooked in this pot.
So we're thinking it's about 1500.
Yeah, it's around about 1500 BC.
It's odd that something that looks so insignificant can tell us so much. This piece of Cornish Trevisca ware confirms this was a Bronze Age home. And what's more, we know they were cooking here 3,500 years ago. Back in the farmhouse, Ben and Emma are beginning to run tests on some floor surfaces from the house in Trench 1 and material from Phil's cairn. Organic matter, such as discarded food or animal dung, rots down and leaves phosphates. Animal dung was commonly used as fuel in Bronze Age houses, and by running these tests, it could give us an indication of the level of human activity.
Because? Well, obviously sat around the fire, just waste, rubbish being dropped onto the ground, and that persists in the soil over the millennia, basically.
Emma, what are your initial impressions?
Basically, we've got the hearth sample that's gone very blue, very quickly, lots of phosphate, lots of activity. All the way through the centre of the house, we've got, you know, again, evidence of phosphate. And even outside of the door, and that's really gone quite blue, and that went quite fast, didn't it, Ben? Yeah. Again, we've got evidence of phosphate.
On the lower line, there are 3 that have hardly any phosphate at all and one with just a tinge. Where were they from?
Phil's trench, from the bank cairn. As you can see, we're not really getting much evidence for high phosphate levels in those at all. So, you know, clear distinction between the different trenches in terms of the concentration of phosphates in the soils.
This is the sort of science I can really identify with. These organic remains have been locked in the soil for thousands of years. The phosphates also tell us there was little human or animal activity near the cairn. It was possibly a place kept sacred to the memory of the ancestors. It's now middle of day 3, and we need to find out more about this hall. So we've brought Matt and Phil into the trench to help. Though I'm not sure it's the most productive combination.
Call that a brush, Phil?
Yeah, it's a brush. What's that?
Well, I think you'll find this is a far superior brush.
Is it?
Yours looks like a demented hedgehog.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Well, yours looks like having a very abbreviated moustache.
They'd be better off hanging off the side of my head, wouldn't they, Phil?
We're now concentrating all our efforts on this hall because the archaeologists believe it's key to proving that we're dealing with a royal site, which still kind of niggles me. Because let's be honest, whether we've got 1 hall or 5, it's a huge leap from stains in the ground to a royal estate.
Helena, from the moment that you saw those air photos, you went, I really think this is a royal site. And then when we dug that first trench, you went, yes, yes, it's confirmed. Why? I mean, there's very little evidence to go on, isn't it?
Well, I've always been struck from the moment I saw these aerial photographs by the similarities between Sutton Courtenay and a very famous Anglo-Saxon site about which we know quite a lot, called Yevering up in Northumbria. We've got this L-shaped arrangement of buildings. Yevering also has a series of great halls very similar to this, similar in size, similar in layout.
But why did you assume that it had royal connections?
Yeah, well, I don't have to assume it. I've been told it by none other than Bede, the famous Anglo-Saxon historian, who tells us that in the 7th century, round about the year 628, that the King of Northumbria, King Edwin, actually came with his queen and his courtiers, his nobles, to a place called Yevering, and there dwelt 36 days, and he says it was a royal Villa Regia.
So, judging by the Yevering comparison, our site certainly looks as though it could be royal. And what's more, having surveyed the surrounding landscape, Stuart thinks he's got evidence which supports this idea.
The important thing in the Saxon landscape is the river.
Right.
We're standing just there where the site is. You see this beautiful sweeping boundary going round here with the water in the bottom. This is the sort of former edge of the River Thames.
So it was right next to our site, virtually.
What we've got is a possibility here of a river landing.
Well, you could bring huge great boats up here, couldn't you, with imports from anywhere you like?
Absolutely. I mean, it becomes a key focal point on the River Thames.
Yeah.
The other point to bring out on here as well is this old road, which is way beyond where the cars are.
Yeah.
This is also a parish boundary. I think this is the road into the complex where the halls are.
Oh, wow, that's fantastic.
Now I get it. At first I couldn't understand why a royal centre would be in the middle of nowhere. But if this was a riverside site on the main road, then I can see why it became so important. And it's now nearly the end of our time at Sutton Courtenay, and I think the archaeologists finally have a handle on the site.
We are standing in the sunken future building.
A grub to me.
A grub. And if we come over here, basically what they did is they put a big hall over the top of it. So we've got a wall here, and it goes through where you're standing. And
then out and returning back through there.
Yeah. Where you are right now is our entranceway.
And then the building is running straight back through that way, is it?
Yeah,
It's aligned this way.
Yep.
So the doorway is, again, in the end and not in the side.
So brilliantly, it does seem we've got 2 phases of Anglo-Saxons, who first lived here in grub huts as a small community, which then grew as they were replaced with a series of halls. Geophys have already surveyed the rectory gardens, so with permission from the owner, we're opening up a test pit here.
This road continued in the past on through your garden, and it's got properties coming off it, coming down the hill here, and we've no idea what date they are at all. So what we're doing here is we're putting in a little tiny test pit, and we'll sieve it to get any pottery out, and hopefully that will tell us what date the properties that have been here actually are.
Sadly, our last trench in Wickdeave has failed to find any Saxon evidence, or indeed anything. We're going to close down our trenches here, and Phil will go over to the church dig at Wickhammon, where we've got some breaking news.
You've caught us at the most exciting moment. We think we found at least part of a skull in the grave cut.
And the other thing that's really exciting is we've just extended the trench. Out of the machining came a piece of pottery.
Paul has dated that to Maxiware 650 to 750.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's the early stuff we've got then.
I know it is beginning to raise the possibility that there is activity, including burials, on this site, right from the Middle Saxon period.
Point of clarification, are you the same archaeologist who was so miserable around the bonnet of the man earlier on?
Yeah, I'm the one who's jumping up and down with delight.
Fantastic. We have got an in-situ burial, and it could be 1,300 years old, although it has been disturbed by later building on this site.
We've got this grave cut here. The skull would have been just under the wall here, but as you can see, because they were building the wall, they've messed around with it, and the skull has actually travelled down to here. None of the bones are articulated. They're just a jumbled mess. And here we have some of the teeth.
That's hardly worn at all. That's
No.
like a juvenile or a young adult,
Yeah.
isn't it?
The piece of Maxiware, this lovely little chunk, that actually came out of the machining from just a little bit further away, from here. So it's a couple of metres from the burial. Shows activity happening in the same area, but doesn't actually date it, can't really be related to it. Sorry if I got your hopes up earlier.
Ideally, what we need is to find more pottery in the grave to precisely date the burial. This bit comes from a pot that would have looked something like this, and surely it's an encouraging sign that there was something going on here in Saxon times. We've only got a few hours left to find out, so it's just as well that we're starting to make sense of the medieval church. We wanted to find the junction between the nave, where the congregation stood, and the chancel, where the altar was, and it looks like we've found it. The basic plan, as we understand it, looks like this. We've got a church that was enlarged at various times and orientated east-west as normal. However, rather than having burials parallel with the building, we've discovered a grave orientated north-south and under the wall of the medieval building. The betting is that it's a Saxon burial, but can we prove it? I'm hoping we've at last found the oldest bit of this village, the original Saxon settlement that would have been called Wick. This is turning out to be a spectacular trench. The medieval finds alone are enough to impress the farmer who normally works this field. And lots of lovely small metal finds.
Quite incredible that you can find these.
Well, these were with the help of the metal detectorists, and we've got some rather wonderful things. I mean, this is just a pin, but when you're in a churchyard, it's almost certainly a shroud pin. And then we've got a coin. This is a halfpenny of one of the Henrys from the London Mint, probably Henry VI, sometime in the 15th century. But this is the most interesting.
It's like a hinge.
It is like a hinge, yes. When you turn it over, you can see it's got a little hole in the bottom. Now, that would have fitted on a strap on the cover of a book, and this would have fitted over a peg on the other cover. And through the hinge, you'd have put a cord, so you could have pulled it off to open your book. And this dome stops the leather cover from rubbing on the wood of the shelf or the lectern.
And in its heyday, this church would have been well attended and a very important meeting point for the area.
For the whole village, yes. Yes, it would have been absolutely the heart of the village.
Oh, absolutely.
It doesn't look anything deliberate, does it?
Nothing man-made though, is there?
Nothing deliberate.
The Isle of Man's littered with stonework, demonstrating how different cultures came here and reinvented the island's language, religion and art. The best examples are across the island at Maggould, where a collection of stones show how Christian art evolved over hundreds of years, including the turbulent 10th century when Vikings settled on the island, bringing their pagan beliefs.
Scandinavians didn't have a tradition of sculpting stone, but amazingly they take it, adopt it, adapt it, and the vast majority of the examples on the island date to the period after the Scandinavian settlement.
So what's this one?
Well, this one's broken, but almost certainly it would have had a cross at the top of the sculpture, because we have a number on the island where we have crosses at the top and Scandinavian imagery.
So is it pagan imagery?
Well, yes, there's some interesting figures here. There's profile of an otter here. It's holding a fish in its mouth, and there's a little figure down here holding a stone in its hand. That represents the god Loki from Norse mythology, casting a stone at an otter eating a salmon, which is from the Sigurd mythological stories.
So you've got a Norse myth on a cross which is Christian?
That's absolutely the case, and the Sigurd story is particularly significant because one of the most famous scenes in that story is that Sigurd kills a dragon and roasts its heart, and to test whether it's cooked or not, he sticks his thumb into the dragon's heart. It's very hot, so he sticks it in his mouth. Now, that moment, after he consumes the dragon's blood, he can miraculously then understand the words of the birds, and it has been argued that there may be a parallel between that and the Christian Eucharist, where we have enlightenment through the consumption of the body and the blood of Christ.
So is this a case of the Vikings weaving their own myths into the Bible myths?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you can almost regard this sculpture as a teaching aid where someone is showing that there are parallels between the two different belief systems.
This fusion of Viking and Celtic culture also had an effect on the island's architecture.
Ah, now you see, yes.
And Andy now believes that the construction techniques used in the Keeill suggest it's post-Viking from the 11th century onwards.
At the moment, we seem to have a very nice face on the inside, but a very raggedy face on the outside. This wall, as it stands, is simply not wide enough to stand.
The more I look at it, the more I feel that maybe these long walls might have an inner leaf that's stone, and then you've got a turf bank, effectively, providing mass to make sure that the stone walls inside don't spread.
Anyway, it doesn't still give me great cause for optimism that we've actually got a corner.
Over in Trench 1, we've got major doubts about the terminal cairn being prehistoric, especially when you compare it with the single stone row.
Is the cairn earlier or later than the stone row?
And we should get it in that section.
Absolutely.
All right, fair enough.
And it's not looking any better in Trench 2 either, as we're uncovering evidence that the cairns aren't prehistoric at all.
We've removed the silt here. You can see this really fine, almost clay on top there. And that was the silt from the bottom of the reservoir. And it's sitting on top of this dark layer, which is the ground surface in 1860 when the reservoir was filled. And here's our cairn, and you can see that the stones of the cairn are sitting happily right on top the 1860 ground surface.
And that means, Raksha?
Well, it means that it's not prehistoric, and we know that because it's literally just sat on top of that black surface. It's not cut into that, so there isn't a specific cut made for it.
Does this mean that all the piles of stones around the reservoir are likely to be from the 1860s?
Well, that one's 1860. This one here as well, in front of you, that's also clearly sitting on top of that old ground surface. The cairns that we have are coming in a line along the edge of the reservoir. They're all in a nice line. My bet is none of them are prehistoric.
I seem to remember not long ago saying that this all seemed too good to be true. Scarily, I was right.
Since we've proved that the cairns aren't prehistoric, what on earth does that mean for the rest of the site? Could the double stone row be the next to go?
Tracy. That hole, what, was a stone in there once?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really nice, Robert. It's been pulled out, presumably when the reservoir's been done.
Yeah, it looks about that level. So then over here, we've got another stone, the one that matched that. Oh, yes. I mean, I think we've got the hole, haven't we, for the stone?
It looks like it. I mean, you can see that small rock standing down there.
That's the classic wedging for a stone in a stone row. And the other thing, of course, we got this stony stuff at the top here. Do you think that could be the remains of a sort of walkway?
It's degraded down and it's covering the surface. So this must have been at the point at which this was open to walk up and down on, I would have thought.
I think that's brilliant. OK, I'm convinced, especially with that little packing stone there, that this is a prehistoric double stone row.
Yeah.
I mean, little doubt about it.
So Francis is very happy with his double stone row. But other parts of the site have got us scratching our heads.
Could have easily been set up.
OK.
Which could have fallen over.
We've got another massive monument to investigate, and Helen and Stuart are getting their heads round it. the stone circle.
They're looking much more into the centre, aren't they?
That's right.
Yeah. Now, this is the one that's vastly off the line.
They're not sure that the stones are even in a circle. It's too late in the day to put in another trench, so the plan is to start digging tomorrow to try to prove the stones are prehistoric and form a circle.
When the Romans came here, they were looking for somewhere to which they could dominate the landscape, somewhere close to guard a river crossing. And what they found here was absolutely ideal, because two sides of it are actually almost at a right angle. They got two sides of a Roman fort ready-made for them.
This fort at Drumlanrig is positioned at the junction of 3 Roman roads and is ideally located to guard a fording point on the River Nith.
We know from aerial photography that there's a temporary Roman camp in this field down below us here. You can't see it now because the conditions are not right. And there's a big marching camp in that field on the other side of the river. What that tells us is that it must have been a fording point in this river here, this camp either side of it. So you can see how there's almost like a clustering of Roman activity around this point.
Having looked at the maps, Stuart knows this has been a fording point since the 1700s, and it may be the actual crossing point used by the Roman army.
It's such a good choice of location that would have been the same for all different periods, from the early forts right through to the later forts.
So is that why you think that there was this continual phasing of fort activity on that
That's
side?
right. There was no need to move. This was a critical place in the domination of this valley to be able to control where they crossed the river.
In Roman terms, this was a small fort, probably housing something like 600 soldiers. Although some of them may have been outposted to man one of the very small fortlets, like this one at Domesday, just half a day's march away. With so many Roman soldiers around, it's surprising that this is the first coin we've found.
The size tells me straight away it's Roman small change from the 1st or 2nd centuries.
Right.
But it's a little bit smaller than the 1st century ones, so for my money it's going to fit with that Antonine date pottery we've had off the side. So it's going to be probably 130s, 140s, 150s. I guess that's what it's going to be. But the key thing is, where did it come from, Matt?
Well, we're getting underneath this demolition there, and it's just onto this floor surface, just lying on the floor surface here.
Right, so it's going to date the destruction above that, isn't it?
Yeah.
Can I ask you about this now, Phil?
Yeah, I think you can, Mick.
You've calmed down a bit, have you?
Not at all. You see, it does pay for you to go away.
Well, absolutely, yeah, because it looks good, doesn't it?
Well, it does. I mean, I don't think there's any question about it. I'm slap bang in the middle of the headquarters building.
I mean, that looks like a really good hard floor you've got there.
It is. We've got this wonderful pink mortar floor.
In fact, we're finding evidence of the same mortar floor in both of these trenches across the headquarters building.
Yeah, well, you can see this label 513. It's exactly the same floor surface as Phil's got.
Right, so what, is that a foundation trench you've got there?
No, this isn't the foundation trench for this stone at all.
This big stone is thought to be a step, one of the few that's left in situ.
But sat on that is this floor here, and below it is another floor layer.
Is this our two forts? I mean, it looks like the 513 layer and my floor could be the second fort.
Yep.
And that 515 layer could be the early fort.
Yeah. So that's our first glimpse, actually, in the bottom of that hole of what's going on under all this lot, isn't it?
It just gives you an idea of the potential of this site, doesn't it? It's
So
awesome. It really is
We're
awesome.
only just going to tickle the surface, aren't we, what time we got
That's
left?
right.
Yeah.
Geophys's completed survey has revealed lots more buried archaeology for the experts to think about, and it can now be studied against our 3D model of the site. But most importantly, what the Geophys plot has given us is a much clearer idea about the layout of the 2nd century fort.
We can put on the ramparts and the ditches. Now, we know about those, obviously, Phil's dug the trench right the way through it, so we've got a pretty good idea of that. Now, we've got the headquarters building, which Kerry and the others have been opening the trenches up across, so we know that building's there, and it's pretty clear from the geophysics. Now, that's the nodal point, if you like, and from this, everything else pans off. So we can put in the other buildings according to the geophysics.
That's very good, isn't it? And
Yeah.
you can really see those in the geophys.
So there's the barracks, probably for the infantry. There's our headquarters building. I put granaries here and our commandant's house, but to be honest, we really can't be certain about exactly where those were in this fort. More barracks here, perhaps for a cavalry contingent, if there was one here. We end up, therefore, with roughly 480 infantry and possibly 120 cavalry at the end. Standard Roman unit.
Guy may be right, because it looks like there were definitely some cavalry here.
So one of the trenches behind you.
This is really exciting. This is so Roman Imperial cavalry.
Really?
Yeah. It can only work in a limited number of places on the harness. As you can see, the main harnessing on the saddle itself, which stops the saddle from either moving forwards or backwards, has these fittings.
Right.
So it's more likely to be perhaps here, or on a brow band, somewhere where it's going to be more or less permanently in place. Line of them polished up, they'd look fantastic, as all of this harness does.
But for a Roman site, we've had relatively few finds.
I really expected there to be bucket loads of stuff.
Well, there are bucket loads of finds around here. They're just not on the fort because the Roman army did its housework when it packed up. It didn't leave the stuff around for the enemy or for anybody else. It cleared away the fort. And all the archaeology we produced just suggests that this is a very complicated site with a lot of occupation, with several occupation layers in a very tight date range, but neatly cleared away every time.
And in most cases, we haven't gone into those layers of archaeology. We've just come down onto the top of them.
Which is precisely what we've done on our 2nd century headquarters building in several trenches. Finally, what can we say about it?
We didn't know whether this was a dividing wall or the back wall of the main building.
This is of the headquarters building?
The headquarters,
right,
yeah.
Right.
There might have been a room coming this way.
Right.
So we put this trench in.
Yeah.
And all we've got is this road surface. That's all we could see on the geophysics.
But there might be something in this gap, mightn't there?
There might be something, but come and look at Phil's trench.
I've cracked it. I've cracked it. I tell you. We've actually got all the components in here. We've got the main road and it actually stops here. And the reason it stops is that it's butting up against the back of the main wall.
It's difficult to see because the stone walls have been robbed away, but as I understand it, Phil's located the massive back wall of the building, and inside it, evidence of a room with a wooden partition wall and the trace of what might be a dais or raised floor. It's likely that this was the Chapel of the Standards, the room at the heart of the headquarters where they kept items such as a bronze Draco and the other valuables. And as we found lots of evidence of burning within this huge building, it seems likely that the Roman soldiers set fire to the headquarters just as they did to the wooden buildings, before leaving Western Scotland for the last time and withdrawing to Hadrian's Wall around 160 AD. And almost immediately, we've got our first find.
Roman, our first piece of Samian.
While Phil works his way through the plough soil, our resident historian has been casting his somewhat sceptical eyes over our geophys.
Well, look, I don't think it's a temple, because a Romano-Celtic temple wouldn't normally turn up here, which is that kind of shape. I think it's much more likely to be a mausoleum.
Why do you say that?
Well, it reminds me of a mausoleum just outside Rome on the Appian Way, which consists of an enclosure wall and then with a central tomb in the middle.
So what's the difference between a temple and a mausoleum?
A mausoleum is a place that's dedicated to the memory of a deceased person. You might actually worship there religiously. You know, you go and perhaps offer sacrifices to the spirits of your departed. But I'd guess that that's more likely to turn out to be the mausoleum of maybe a commanding officer of this fort.
Well, finding the last resting place of a Roman commander doesn't happen every day. And I have to admit the geophysics results are some of the most striking we've ever seen on Time Team. So, with a strong sense of anticipation, we open our 3rd trench over what looks like one of the walls of our possible mausoleum.
That's almost exactly the line of the wall where that sheep track is.
We'll hold you to that.
You know what I said, almost exactly?
Ah, almost exactly.
Yeah.
I never known a sheep walk in a straight line.
No. A bit like yourself, isn't it, after the beer?
After a few beers, yeah.
We put this rather long trench in here because earlier today John did some geophys here and he came up with 2 things which looked suspiciously like ditches. Naomi, can I come in your trench?
Of course you can.
Yeah.
This is the edge of one of our ditches. This is the ditch fill. Okay, and if we come this way,
yeah,
where this lighter patch is, this is our other edge, so it's quite a wide ditch.
That is a heck of a big ditch, isn't it?
Yeah.
What's that there?
Well, here it's just something we're just uncovering. It looks like a nice piece of mortaria.
Which is?
Which is kind of like a pestle and mortar for grinding food.
And this stuff here?
Again, just another nice chunky vessel.
Both Roman?
It's definitely looking that way.
So does that mean that we can date this ditch as Roman?
I should say so, yeah.
I've built up the basic topography of the landscape as it is now, and on top of it I've dropped up what would have been the fort. And the first thing you'll notice is half the fort's hanging off the landscape.
I mean, there is a very good reason for that, because this side of the fort has actually slipped away. There's been a big landslip on this side here by the river, and it literally has gone. So it looks rather nice, but you're going to have to lose that side of it.
Okay.
But what that illustrates really well is this high ground that the fort sits on, because it actually sits on effectively a raised island, doesn't it? The river on one side, the valley down here. That's a really dramatic piece of topography for dominating this major crossing of the river here.
Very distinctive.
So we extend Trench 2 into the area we hope's an early fort and continue to excavate our possible mausoleum trench. We've now uncovered this fantastic wall, and we need to work out how it relates to our potential cremation urn.
So that's cleaning it really nicely now, isn't it? With that should be the inner face, according to the geophys, of whatever we've got here.
I'll take your word for that.
With not one but two discoveries of potentially national significance, our hunt for the Vicus takes a back seat, with only Matt left scraping away in search of the substantial stone buildings recorded in the 19th century. Matt, we've got a mausoleum down there, we've got cremation burials, we've got a brand new Roman fort that no one's ever seen before. What have you got in your trench?
Well, apart from all this stone rubble, we've got hope, and we've got a day and a half as well, so we'll see how it goes.
It's all getting pretty exciting over there, apparently, so we're going to leave a skeleton crew on the headland, which is fairly appropriate, I suppose, and the rest of us are going over to see what's happening. After we left, it seems our archaeological hermits made the most of their island experience. They've even been barbecuing limpets in a bid for authenticity.
Yeah, they're very tasty. It's just hard work.
But this morning, they've been hard at it. The big news is that Matt's found a burial carved into the bedrock. Ian thinks he's finally found the west wall of the chapel, and Tracy's cleaned up the possible standing stone. So, you've got a grave cut, haven't you?
This is it here, look. You can see it cut into the shale, going all the way along there. There's the wider head end, coming back down here.
Do my eyes deceive me, or is that a very big bone?
That is a very big shin bone. There's his foot there. Unfortunately, no knee bone and no sign of a thigh yet.
Do you think it might belong to the same person we found on the first day?
Well, in a way, I hope not, because that would mean the burial's been really disturbed.
Disturbed or not, if he's buried inside the building, he could be a significant figure in the chapel's history. That's a really curious-looking wall you've got there.
Well, yes, but I did tell you yesterday that this was a crucial part of the site. Now we've got it cleaned up, I think we can say that it's probably the buttress for the chancel arch, because you see that the wall carries on, and you see it's very, very nicely plastered. But I think what is interesting is that it's quite a complicated story, because here you've got this plaster here, and you can see the line of the wall continuing through here. So I think that this stone is actually added on, which implies to me that this is not just one chapel that was built and then that was it. Periodically, it was refurbished, it was strengthened, it was modified. It's a very, very long story.
And part of that story, the addition of the chancel, is exactly the same as we found on the mainland. But this isn't the only similarity. It looks like Matt's burial is in the same position as the reliquary in front of the altar. If only our big-boned man could tell us when he was buried. Because we're running out of time to work out just how long this story is. Meanwhile, in Trench 1 over the defences, things are going well.
What's that then?
Along the side.
Oh, you're talking about these wonderful swords here?
I certainly am.
Yeah, they look
It looks like we're finding the layers of individual turfs cut by the Roman soldiers to build the rampart around 2,000 years ago.
And the brown stuff on top of them is the decayed organics, isn't it? Of the sort of grass side down. Grass side down turf, like that.
And the great thing is we've also got this ditch down here. We're Phil's digging. Looks like there's a ditch that's contemporary with this rampart. Yeah, it's really nice.
While in this test pit, what I was calling Trench 2, I'm lending a hand and learning that timber structures leave fairly subtle evidence.
I've got something here, something black, which looks to me either like a fireplace or a post hole, I don't know.
Well, charcoal at least. It'll need cleaning up a bit more to see the edges, won't it?
I thought I'd cleaned it up. Could this be packing around it?
It could be, or Gordon was saying it might be to support timbers for buildings. You remember I said to you earlier that if you put timber buildings up, you don't see much trace on the surface when they've rotted. But, you know, if you've got to level them up with stones and stuff, and it's those stones that we get in lines like that, isn't it? Yeah.
How much cleaner have I got to get this thing?
Well, as clean as you can, really. You don't want any of that loose stuff lying about, you know.
Well, that's just my little pile.
Well, you shouldn't leave little piles, really, like that.
Sorry. Having a go, you've only just arrived.
I've gone through the stage of doing the digging like that. I'm like the surgeon who's dropped the doctor bit, you see.
But there's no doubt about it, today's biggest success has been the geophys survey of this field. It's revealed what's effectively an archaeological map of the fort.
It's stunning good.
You beaut. Well, we started to fill in the gaps on the aerial photograph. There we could see the main street and the roads going off to the side. Here we've got it in the geophysics and all the details of the barrack blocks. Now what we've got in this area here is a rather large, perhaps stone building.
Yeah. And why does that make John such a beaut?
Here we have the central range of buildings here, with the huge courtyard building, which is the Principia headquarters building, right in the middle.
Both Gordon and Tony are sure that this is the headquarters building. And it's possible that these white lines on the geophys indicate the only stone building in the entire fort.
But the important thing is you now know the layout.
Yeah, we can navigate our way around the fort now. We can name the streets. So that now is the Via Principalis. This is the Via Praetoria. We know exactly where we are now.
It would be a great relief for me to see a bit of stone, because so far all we've seen is shadows in the ground.
Well, you're going to see it soon in that small trench across the wall there.
Well, I started the day wondering if there really was a fort here, and geophys have proved it to me in the most spectacular way. This trench should reveal the stone remains of a 2nd century Roman headquarters building.
That looks pretty encouraging. Turn it into a building now.
What kind of date do you think these are?
I think these are probably early 14th century.
So how does that tie in with this trench?
That shows us, along with these massive walls, that there's a really big building phase of early 1300s around this rectangular courtyard here.
Yeah.
Is this one of the legendary buttresses?
Yes. And you can see the mason's marks on it as well on the side.
Great, isn't it, that we've got the autograph of one particular worker who was working on this fantastic site.
This is clearly a huge building campaign that produces, from what you're showing us, some sort of really posh aristocratic manor house. Not necessarily fully fortified, but like a palace almost.
The Greys are doing really well.
They are,
absolutely.
yeah.
But after that, it's demolished, and they start to build, presumably, that big house over there. And we're just getting glimpses in each of the trenches of what went on before this lot was put up.
So this is the bailey of the Motte and Bailey Castle?
Yeah, where we've got timber slots and bits of pots and odd little trenches. And we're never going to get a complete plan out of it, but at least we can see a much less regular layout of the buildings in this bailey before they come in. And, I mean, this is a mega project.
When the Greys were at the apex of their power.
Great result! We now not only know what Gruby's buildings looked like, but we can actually chart their history right back to the Norman period. After 1066, Hugh Gromany was given the land and built himself a really substantial Motte and Bailey castle with a stone keep and living quarters in the enclosure surrounding it. And this was the Greys' home until the 14th century, when they decided to upgrade.
Most of the buildings that we've excavated seem to have come into use round about the early 1300s. How is that reflected in the history?
Well, we don't have anyone that we can definitely identify as the builder, but we've got here a William Ferrers who summoned Parliament as Baron of Gruby, and he dies in 1325. So this is about the sort of time that you can imagine them going, we've got the name, we've got the position, we're rising in society. What we want is a really nice, big, medieval, you know, style house to kind of back that up, really.
What about when our houses were demolished in the late 1400s, early 1500s? What was going on then?
Well, this comes into the people that I'm really interested in, because Elizabeth Woodville has 2 boys by John Grey, and one of them is Thomas Grey, and as part of her rise in the royal family, he becomes a marquis. He's given a marquis and he marries an heiress with the title. Maybe he goes, well, I'll start building here again and make this the show house that I want it to be if I'm going to be now a great Tudor magnate, having been a great Plantagenet magnate. So he builds the great brick tower and I think starts work on here.
So he might have demolished all the stuff that we've been excavating then, and that's where we get our brick tower.
So perhaps when the Greys' fortunes rose with William Ferrers in the 14th century, they began to build their stunning medieval home with 2-storey accommodation, a magnificent great hall and buttressed ranges forming a quadrangle. A property fit for the remarkable Elizabeth Woodville, Queen of England. And later her son, the Marquis Thomas Grey, went one better, demolishing this stone palace and building an even more fashionable brick residence, our 15th century tower.
Is this really how hawks would have been carried in Tudor times?
Yes, this is the cadge, the forerunner of the Range Rover.
The cadge?
And this is where we get these wonderful sayings to cadge a lift, and the old codger, because someone that carried the birds, if he had a few grey hairs, he'd actually be known as an old codger. So we get these lovely phrases from this frame.
Oh, Codger, got the birds with you?
I've got the birds, thank you. What are you going to do?
Well, we've only been practicing this morning, so I'm not sure is probably the answer. We haven't tried this with the actual birds at all yet, but hopefully we'll be able to sort of fly the birds around and get them to come to the lure and fly past me, and it'll all look wonderful.
She's very alert. Yep, she knows Carenza is the person to watch already, so we'll just keep an eye on her. Keep turning to face her all the time. OK, Carenza, start swinging. She's a good distance away. Prepare to pass and pass. Well done!
Fantastic.
Tony, if we come around the other side.
Yeah. Wow.
Good girl. What we're trying to do is keep well out of reach. OK, here she comes again. Prepare to pass, pass.
Whoa.
Well done, fantastic. OK, start swinging. We'll try and call her back over, and I think we'll try and give her her reward. OK. Now, swinging nice and fast. Get ready to throw up. And now.
Yes!
Yes. Well done.
Well done.
Was it scary?
It was very exciting.
Yeah.
It's such a split second between knowing whether it's going to work or not that you don't really have time to be scared. But that moment when I actually pulled it away fast enough and she went past was just fantastic.
You can see why it might have been so attractive to the Tudors. It's very modern, all that speed and turning. It's like motorbikes or cars.
I mean, my heart's going dum, 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 dum.
It's exhilarating, isn't it? It really is, yeah.
That's
Thrill of the chase, that's what it's all about.
Join Time Team on Patreon to access exclusive 3D models, masterclasses and behind-the-scenes insights.